Beautiful, intelligent, popular, friend, daughter. You could use any of these words to describe Betty Gail Brown, and you would be correct. She had everything to live for, and then she was murdered. Mother's intuition. Can science ever really explain it? It's that gut instinct that instantly tells you that something is wrong. That sixth sense that catapults a mother into action when she knows that her child is in danger. It's those feelings that led Betty Gail's mother to go searching for her in the early morning hours of October 27, 1961. Mr. Brown said that his wife would never go to sleep until Betty Gail came home at night. On that October evening, Mrs. Brown stayed up reading, waiting for her daughter to return. She watched the minutes tick by. She watched the hour grow later, until an uneasiness began to creep into her chest and sit like a heavy weight. Then, without disturbing her husband, Mrs. Brown went searching into the dark of night for her beloved daughter, Betty Gail. In a few short hours, Mr. and Mrs. Brown would learn the horrible, heartbreaking fate of their only child. The senseless and horrific murder of 19-year-old Betty Gail would devastate the community of Lexington, Kentucky. Newspapers would describe her as the ideal American girl. Why would someone take the life of the pretty blonde Transylvania College coed that was always kind and friendly to everyone? She was an honors student, choir singer, and Sunday school teacher. No one in town was more popular, and because of that popularity, no one would ever come to terms with her death. As we begin to peel back the layers of this 62-year-old cold case, we'll take a close look at how Betty Gail's killer may have gotten away with her murder at the end of this video. This is Transylvania College in Lexington, Kentucky. The private university's student enrollment in 1961 was 590. Betty Gail had earned a scholarship that allowed her to attend the university of her dreams. And it is on this very campus that Betty would lose her life. Detective Captain Raleigh Leach gave this account of the events that led up to her murder. Betty Gail went to Forer Hall at about 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, October 26th. She was meeting up with friends to study for a biology exam. Pam Van Arsdale, sorority sister and close friend of Betty Gail, said she talked with her just a few hours before she was murdered. She didn't appear upset about anything. Her only concern was a French test that she was to take the next morning. Betty Gail was majoring in French and had aspirations of becoming a French teacher. At 11:50 p.m., Betty Gail told friends that she was heading home. Mrs. John Combs, house mother at Forer Hall, told officers that she said goodbye to Betty Gail and watched as she walked across Broadway. Betty's car was parked in the circular drive of the administration building. Charles Risden, who also attended Transylvania College, said that he had taken his girlfriend back to the dormitories and on his return saw Betty Gail sitting in her car. Risden told detectives he pulled his car alongside Miss Brown's, and the two chatted for a few minutes about the impending exam. They both left the campus at the same time and drove north on Broadway to 4th Street and then east on 4th to Upper. He said he turned into a parking lot on Upper Street and remembers seeing Betty Gail's car on Upper near 3rd Street heading south. Risden may have been the last person to see her alive. For the next hour and a half, no one knows for sure where Betty Gail went. 2 students reported hearing a scream at 1:15 a.m. Betty Gail's life would end here at 1:30 a.m. During this time, Betty's mother would begin her search. Mrs. Brown made 2 trips out looking for her daughter. She stated that during her frantic search, she just narrowly missed turning into the driveway of Morrison Hall at the time that her daughter was being strangled. She had considered turning into the drive, but remembers thinking, "I had better not. That would be absurd. She never parked in there." Having no luck finding her daughter, Mrs. Brown returned home at 1:45 a.m., just 15 minutes after passing Morrison Hall. Mrs. Brown alerted her husband that Betty Gail was missing. Mr. Brown immediately notified city and county police and called all the local hospitals. Patrolman Don Duckworth received the report of the missing girl at 2:51 a.m. After searching for only 9 minutes, the officer found Betty Gail's 1959 Simca parked in the driveway of Morrison Hall. The area was brightly lit but secluded. Duckworth said her head was back on the seat and she looked as though she were asleep. A patch of hair had been torn from the top of her head, and there was a cut over one eye. The officer alerted headquarters of the gruesome discovery. Before learning of her daughter's murder, Mrs. Brown decided to make a 3rd trip out to search for Betty Gail, retracing possible routes that she may have taken. Mrs. Brown recounted tearfully to a reporter how she was notified of her daughter's death. "I parked in the spot where Betty would have parked earlier. I started to leave when I saw the house mother and the girls huddled in the door. I ran over to them. They had heard what had happened to my daughter, but didn't tell me. They were in complete shock. They took my arm and said, 'Come in. The police will be here soon.' I felt something was wrong. I jerked loose. I got in my car, and then I saw the policeman come by. When I looked at his face, it was very compassionate, and I knew that something was badly wrong. 'Have you found her?' I asked. 'Yes, we found your daughter,' he replied. His chin was trembling. 'Is she alive?' 'No, ma'am. Your daughter is dead,' he said. 'Don't tell me any more. Let's go home.' Mrs. Brown went home with the officers, and together they told Mr. Brown what had happened to their daughter. The details of the crime scene were just as mysterious as the murder itself. Here is what authorities found at the scene. Betty Gail was known to be meticulous, consistent, and careful. As Detective Captain Gilbert Cravens reported, she even locked her car doors while driving in the daytime. What was unusual about the victim's car was that the right front door was unlocked at the time that the body was found. The car keys were found on the left rear floorboard of the four-door car, and her notebook and school papers lay in an orderly fashion on the front seat. The victim was found sitting behind the wheel of the vehicle, hands lying in her lap. She wore Bermuda shorts, a white blouse, brown sweater, and a car coat. Her clothing was undisturbed. Her blouse was still tucked neatly in place, with only the top few buttons loosened. A piece of her bra, except for the straps, were lying in her lap. The rest of the bra was lying around her shoulders. Coroner Chester Hager gave this report. The bruises on the victim's neck and chin indicated that she was strangled from behind. Other injuries included a left chest abrasion and a cut over her left eye. The wound above her eye had bled into her eyebrow, and was the result of a struggle during the attack. The victim struck her head and dented the right side dash while trying to fight off her assailant. Her forehead still bore the imprint of a letter that was contained in the nameplate on the car's dashboard. The nail on the index finger of her left hand was broken. The victim had a large quantity of food in her stomach, indicating she had last eaten around 8 p.m. Blood spatter was found on the dashboard and the driver's side window. A portion of the victim's scalp on the top of her head had been pulled with such force it was found torn loose. The victim showed no signs of being sexually assaulted. Upon further investigation of the victim's car, it was revealed that a right dome light had been knocked from its mounting. The right front hubcap thrown from the car earlier was on the right front floorboard. Several sets of fingerprints, along with others that had been smeared, were found inside the car. In an effort to find more fingerprints that might not have shown up by using powder, investigators used a method of placing iodine crystals inside of Betty Gail's car. Detective Craven was also able to rule out robbery as a motive. Betty Gail's pocketbook and jewelry were never taken. As the crime scene investigation came to an end, police were unable to determine if the victim had picked up someone or whether the slayer had hidden in the car while she was on campus studying. Police went door to door and interviewed scores of people in an effort to turn up a possible motive. License numbers of cars parked on or near the campus were collected, and boys that Betty Gail had dated were also questioned. Over 223 male students were fingerprinted in hopes of getting a match to those found inside the car. And then just days into the investigation, a new lead came in. A waitress from a drive-in restaurant came forward with new information. The waitress claimed to have seen Betty Gail and a mystery woman at the restaurant at around 12:30 a.m., just 1 hour before her murder. Police stated that the waitress was able to describe the clothing Betty Gail was wearing and remembered that she had a companion. She reported that the two young women ordered coffee and tea and then left shortly after. The waitress accompanied plainclothes policemen around the campus, to the funeral, and to the burial of Betty Gail, in an effort to spot the other girl that was with her at the restaurant. Unfortunately, no identification was ever made. As the investigation moved forward, there would be a few suspects that detectives took an interest in. The first man was 35-year-old mental patient Joe Agristo that was arrested in Bowling Green, Kentucky on a vagrancy charge. Police found a sum of money on Agristo that he said he got off a woman in Lexington. Upon further questioning, they learned that he had recently left a veterans hospital in Iowa and traveled to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he claimed to be during the murder. No link was ever found between Agristo and the Brown murder. John Covino was the next suspect. Covino was a 1961 graduate of Transylvania College. The 27-year-old was arrested in New York after police approached him and he attempted to pull out a revolver. The young man was dressed as a woman at the time and claimed he was formerly under psychiatric care. Police found over 10 newspaper clippings of Betty Gail's murder in his possession. Covino stated that a friend had sent the clippings to him, and though he knew Miss Brown, he had no involvement in her murder. Covino's father was asked why his son was dressed as a woman, to which he said that the young man's car had been broken into several times, and he put on the disguise in an effort to catch the culprits. When asked if his son needed psychiatric care, he responded, "He needs a hole in the head, that's what he needs." Police would later clear Covino of any involvement in Brown's murder. Of course, there were other persons of interest that would surface from time to time, but none as sad as the accusatory rumor of Mr. and Mrs. Brown murdering their daughter. The vicious rumor circulated that Mrs. Brown killed her daughter and that Betty Gail was not her real daughter. Phone calls and letters from accusers forced the Browns to undergo lie detector tests. Authorities stated the tests definitely cleared them. Naturally, the parents have been disturbed by the rumors that have come back to them, and added to the tragedy, this is hardly any condolence. Betty Gail's case went cold for the next 4 years. Then in 1965, everything would change. 34-year-old Alex Arnold Jr. was arrested in Oregon on a charge of drunkenness. A horse trainer by trade, he had recently fallen on hard times and turned to drinking. While talking to authorities, Arnold stated, "It seems like only a dream that I killed Miss Brown, but I'm 99% sure I did it." Arnold's story goes like this. "I got drunk on wine and I was trying to get home. I got as far as Transylvania when I passed out." Arnold said he woke up under a bush and then finished the wine in his bottle. He wanted a cigarette but needed a match. Arnold noticed a small car parked nearby with 2 women inside, and that Betty Gail was partially nude and embracing another woman. He told police he went to the car and asked for a match. "One of the women cursed me. That made me mad. I jerked open the door on the driver's side. One woman jumped out and ran. The other one tried to get away, so I pushed her and she hit her head on the dashboard. I got scared and I climbed in the back seat of the car and I got the bra. I put it around her neck and I strangled her, then threw the bra on the front seat. I buttoned up her blouse and then I fled the scene." The next week, Arnold was arrested for pandering and served 9 months in the city workhouse. This would explain why police never came in contact with him when they were searching the city for the killer. When Arnold finally went to trial for murdering Betty Gail Brown, the following details were revealed through testimony of those involved in the case. Officer Duckworth, who found Betty Gail, claimed that there were some discrepancies between Arnold's details of events and the evidence found at the scene. Arnold said he threw the bra in the front seat after he strangled Betty Gail. Duckworth testified that the bra was draped from shoulder to shoulder across the neck with the end piece that goes in the back torn loose and lying in her lap. At least one strap, maybe both straps, had been broken off. Arnold said a mystery woman ran from the scene, yet officers found no evidence of anyone being in the car with Betty Gail. Officers said that Arnold admitted to buttoning up Betty Gail's blouse so police wouldn't think she had been raped. The victim's blouse had only 4 buttons, and police only found the first 2 unbuttoned. Arnold said he climbed over the seat and wiped his prints off the dashboard, locked the driver's side door and the 2 in the back, and got out. Noticing the left front window left open, I put my hands on the glass and I forced it closed. Officers testified that Arnold's fingerprints were not found in the car, although there were several smeared prints that were not identifiable. The only clear prints taken from the car were Mr. and Mrs. Brown's and a garage mechanic. Arnold described finding the victim half naked and embracing another woman. Mr. and Mrs. Brown, several witnesses, and Detective Craven, who read Betty Gail's personal diary, said there was no evidence that she was attracted to women. Police determined that the waitress who said that she had seen Betty Gail with a mystery woman at the restaurant the night she was murdered was confused about the dates. Police think the waitress was referring to the previous weekend when Betty Gail had stopped there with a friend. Arnold's confession changed during the trial. He said he was now convinced in his own mind that he didn't murder Betty Gail. "Earlier, I didn't know whether I had killed the girl, and I was intending to find out. I figured this was the best way to do it." The defense was quick to point out to the jury that police never roped off the crime scene, and they didn't start looking for evidence outside the car until after daylight. Arnold's attorney told the jury in his summation, "One part of Mr. Arnold's story is as real in his memory as any other part. You can't believe any one part without taking the rest of it. It is impossible to convict Mr. Arnold without blackening the character of the victim, who Arnold said was hugging and kissing with another girl." The jury deliberated for over 6 hours before reporting that they were hopelessly deadlocked. 7 for acquittal and 5 for conviction. The state of Kentucky never retried Alex Arnold. Mr. and Mrs. Brown had this to say after the trial. "We praise the fine and judicial manner in which the trial of Alex Arnold Jr. was handled, and express our gratitude for the conduct of counsel for both the prosecution and defense. We will continue, as we have done for the past 4 years, to make every effort to reach the truth in our daughter's murder." The Browns emphasized that from all the evidence in connection with the trial, that those parts which were detrimental to their daughter's character were shown to be untrue. Now that we know what happened to Betty Gail and the outcome of the murder trial, let's go over the what-ifs in this case. Let's discuss the details that have kept this case cold for 62 years. Number 1, what if the waitress didn't get the dates confused, and she really did see Betty Gail with a mystery woman the night she was murdered? Remember, the waitress gave a description of what Betty Gail was wearing that night and what she ordered. Police believed in her statement enough to take her to the funeral to try and identify the mystery woman. It wasn't until detectives started getting some pushback from the Browns and Betty Gail's friends that they stopped looking for the woman. Had the waitress been called as a witness in the trial, her testimony would have corroborated Arnold's claim about the other woman and perhaps got him convicted of Brown's murder. Number 2, what if Alex Arnold's confession about what happened on October 27, 1961 was the truth? Arnold was very descriptive about the events that night, and not all of his details came from reading newspapers, as authorities suggested. Testimony of Arnold's fingerprints not being found inside the car doesn't exactly clear him of the crime, because police admitted that there were several smeared prints that they were unable to identify. Arnold himself stated that he wiped down the dashboard, so it's quite possible that he also wiped down other surfaces. Number 3, what if one of the main theories that police offered was actually correct? Police suggested that the assailant somehow got into Brown's car when she was studying on campus and hid behind her seat. I find this theory to be the most unlikely, given that Betty Gail left the campus at around 11:50 p.m. and the coroner lists her time of death at 1:30 a.m. We would then have to believe that she drove aimlessly around town for almost 2 hours before the assailant made his presence known and then strangled her. Police said at the beginning of the investigation that Betty Gail was meticulous about locking her doors and staying safe. So how would the assailant have gotten into her car and gone unnoticed? Number 4, and our final what if. What if John Covino was the mystery woman? Authorities were quick to check John Covino off their list of suspects, yet there were many details surrounding Covino that remain of interest in this cold case. We know that Covino graduated from Transylvania College in 1961, and he admitted to knowing Betty Gail. But how well did he know her? When police tried to question him about the murder, he refused to answer. Covino said that a friend sent him the newspaper clippings of Brown's murder. Who was the friend, and why were the clippings so important to Covino? It was reported that Covino was a representative for an airline. How long had he been employed there, and did he travel often to Kentucky while working for the airline? We know that he was dressed as a woman when he was arrested. Is it possible that he could have been with Betty Gail at the restaurant that night? Was he the mystery woman that the waitress reported seeing? Covino was asked by authorities why he was dressed as a woman, and his reply was, "When I'm drinking, I do crazy things." The answers to these questions surrounding Covino's behavior have never been made public. So many details of Betty Gail's murder have remained a mystery. As recent as 2005, a relative of the Browns released her clothing for further testing. The results yielded no new evidence. All of the other evidence collected in the case was destroyed or lost after the failed trial to convict Alex Arnold Jr. The case, as cold as it may be, remains open, and authorities continue to hope that one day someone will step forward with new information that will help them solve the mysterious murder of Betty Gail Brown. If you have any information, no matter how small the detail may be, please contact the Lexington, Kentucky Police Department at 859-258-3600. Thank you for tuning in today, and thank you for your continued support of EOJ. If you have enjoyed today's video, please help us out by hitting the like button and sharing our content with a friend. Don't forget to comment your thoughts and theories of who you think may have killed Betty Gail Brown. Until we see you again with another cold case, stay well and be safe. This has been Eye on Justice.